Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I'm your host, Matthew. I'm joined, as always, hopefully in the future, by Eric Taylor. And welcome to episode 1 of Learning cEDH. We're going to be talking about hopefully everything you need to know to get into the format, get good at it, and stick around and help get new people into it.
Yeah, excited. You ready for episode 1 today?
Oh, yeah. And so this episode is going to be a lot of sort of basics, kind of the upkeep section of the podcast, but we're going to be going over sort of the philosophy of cEDH, some of the basics of it, and who we are and why you should maybe think about listening to us.
Well, yeah. So Matt, why don't we get started and just tell us a little bit about, cEDH, about how'd you get into cEDH yourself? Like how long you've been playing, all the logistics behind that.
Okay, yeah. I've been into cEDH. I want to say I got into it right during the pandemic because I had nothing better to do, I guess you could say. Where it was like me and my roommate are locked in an apartment, and so I end up getting him into Magic against his will. And then, we just start playing Commander feverishly. And then I end up going through the arms race and get into cEDH and start watching specifically casually competitive. I think that was my thing. So it's like, okay, let's see what this looks like. Because to me before then, it was just like, oh yeah, they're just turn 1 wins. They just go super fast. Like it's not even a game. And then you watch it and you're just like, oh, he just won with a weird merfolk thing. But it was like turn 6. Because I think the first one I saw was with he won with the merfolk that you take an extra turn when it deals combat damage, or that's like when you energy sacrifice it. I can't even remember what it is, but it's a super weird combo. And I was like, okay, well I guess that's cEDH. And then just went down that rabbit hole into playing with power, and then casually competitive or play to win, and then it's downhill ever since. But and now I make, if you're not familiar, this is your first time at the channel, I make beginner cEDH content. Ton of that, it'll all be in the description. Teach you how to play, get the people who actually know what they're talking about instead of me. And they talk to you and get you playing your favorite decks. And what about you, Eric?
So I've been playing Magic since 1998. I don't know if that dates me or not, but one of the first decks I ever played competitively was like a deck at Junior Super Series. It was ran Lightning Dragon, Masticore, Avalanche Riders. This was standard at the time. At the time, it was called Type 2. So, and basically it was a deck called Ponza. So it's like got this pseudo land destruction, and you just try to like take people out with these really sweet creatures. And Lightning Dragon was like the first real competitive card I ever played. And then I ended up playing Green-Red Ponza with Lightning Dragon and Birds of Paradise, which, to this day, I'm still running a big dragon and Birds of Paradise in my deck. So from that point, I just fell in love with Magic. Came from the Pokemon background and never really played Pokemon as a kid, just kind of shifted over and played Magic. And then by playing Magic, I went back, played Pokemon, got really good at it because I learned all these strategies, and used to spend like my time in like school, like on brainburst.com, scrymagazine.com, all these other like resources. It was kind of hard to find if you weren't in the know. Inquest magazine, anything I could to kind of gobble up information to just get better, and just sitting in my floor in like this tiny little apartment in high school, just trying to learn Magic as much as I can in like 7th and 8th grade beforehand, and just fell in love with the game. It literally was like wildfire. It overtook my mind. It gave a lot to me too. It just kind of gave me a space to let my brain be creative, because I love to draw, but drawing was so different for me. It wasn't just like something I could just cut on a whim. It was more of a passion feel thing, but Magic was always there. So from Pokemon and Magic to Yu-Gi-Oh, and just really kind of stayed with Magic the entire time. And I played so many other card games along the way, just because I wanted to test like Magic theory in those games, and if the mechanics were similar. Like the game Force of Will, I played it very similar to Magic, and played any deck that I could shove a Lancelot in there, I was pretty happy with, because that card was pretty broken. Because he also looked like Marth from Smash Brothers, so that made it even better. But to kind of sum it up and get to the Commander, I played Commander a few times with some like decks, and at the time I was playing this was like 2009, playing like Shroom Hegemon and whatnot, and then learn about Bryant's Broken Pile, and then kind of stepped away for it. Really just focused on 60 card formats, and then finally. My local scene was very Commander focused. And so I was like, well, if I want to play Magic, I got to play Commander. And then my roommate really pushed me into playing Commander. And I kept talking about building, like Corvold just came out. I was already like wanting to play Corvold and standard decks. And he was like, that needs to be your Commander. It's everything you want to do in Magic. You want to have a sweet Jund Dragon. It flies, draws cards, and it can win the game. So that's where I got started with Corvold and just piecing together like the generic sacrifice list and whatnot, and then discovered what food chain you could do food chain stuff with Corvold. And then, like you said, at that point it became an arms race at just discovering the leaner, faster versions of Corvold as time kind of expanded. And then at the time it was like Demon Chain and King's Chain were like the big Corvold decks at the time. And then at that point I really started kind of diving into the format and just took off from there.
Yep, and it's all been and it's Corvold ended up being like how I ended up becoming friends with Eric. A lot of you might not know Eric, even though he's actually like probably a better Magic player than most of the people you might know. But yeah, just a random post about Corvold led to this podcast almost a year later, which is terrible to think about. I hate thinking about that. But yeah, I'm still a bit of a Magic baby. I guess I started in 2017 with just happened to walk into a store, spent like the last $20 I had on, I had quit a job for college, spent like the last $20 I had on this random thing to play with my brother, which was a dual deck Merfolk versus Goblins, which at the time was a terrible investment, but I'm so glad I did because I'm still here almost 6 years later. But yeah, and that's us, and now we're going to be talking about cEDH.
We're not here to reminisce the good old times.
Not just for that, maybe a lesser podcast, but we got to get focused. So, how would you define, Eric, cEDH?
So, I hear about a lot of the spirit of the format and everything, and I'll be honest with you, when playing Commander, I just played Commander with my friends. I didn't really know a lot of like the house rules or just the philosophy of it and all this other stuff. And I didn't know that, and it wasn't that I didn't respect it. We just played, and we just played good quality Magic 4-way by the rules and everything of Commander. And then when I got more into cEDH, I kind of took a step back, read all that, and tried to understand that, cEDH is just Commander. It's not this separate format. It's basically you kind of uptake it to the 10th level of just the quality of cards. You're still playing casually with your friends, with people that you don't even know, randomly on spell table or whatever it may be, but you're playing with like optimized cards. So instead of playing like, sometimes Craterhoof Behemoth pops up and, cEDH, but instead of like maybe trying to play with Craterhoof Behemoth, you go for, a Thrasios Infinite Mana combo. It's still a green deck. It still plays some cool stuff that you might see in casual games, but it just allows to express that power, the efficiency of the game, but it doesn't take away what you're supposed to be doing. You're actively trying to win the game instead of, game night on Friday night with friends and pizza, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. The acronym is Competitive Elder Dragon Highlander, and I think the competitive term can be a bit of a misnomer. When you think of Commander as sort of this dichotomy of casual and competitive in relation to the cards that are on the table versus the table you're at, where that sort of casual spirit in probably 90% of all cEDH games is absolutely still there. There's maybe more of an adherence to the rules than you might see in some casual games, and a little bit less of less of the what you might think of as politicking in a casual game of the like, well, don't attack me this turn, and more the like, help me stop him from winning because it's turn two and we got to stop the rock side player. But and I think identifying that and getting from your head the competitive part from it and thinking more of it as just like this is commander, but we're kind of doing it all the way.
Right. Like I very much agree with that. And, you know, instead of playing like 3 mana rocks and, 4 mana rocks like Thran Dynamos and stuff, you're playing, your Mox Diamonds, your Mana Crypts, all those type of things. And you're just trying to be as efficient as possible because, maybe you just enjoy the game to be a little bit faster versus like a 4-hour game, or maybe you like to control the board with like these hyper efficient stacks pieces and those type of things. But no matter what it is, it's trying to play the best of what it can be in terms of those decks. And you can even take like your, and we'll later in another episode probably get into like the top decks and those type of things. But you can take a deck that's just might be deemed casual, but you can build it to its best ability. Now, regardless of whether or not that's a cEDH deck or not, the spirit of the deck to me, or just the thought of the deck, is I'm trying to play this deck to its best ability, whether you want to consider that high power cEDH, whatever that may be. But I'm going to take my Shia deck because I love green elf stuff and play it like that. That's just an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's definitely, especially in that middle ground where you are getting into cEDH, there can be a lot of debate about what is cEDH in terms of the deck. And I think it really isn't helpful because it is about player intention. That like that, I think that's the separation in the deck that you bring and in just with the player, like defining casual and competitive. I think is there. So trying to say like a deck that is lower quality than maybe something like Blue Farm, which we think of as a staple of the format, labeling that not cEDH when its the intention is cEDH, I think can be a little unhelpful, and that's really what it is. And it's a lot of cEDH you could think of as the progression, because really, to be honest, none of us know exactly what the ideal Blue Farm 98 is, and it's really about trying to get there. And sometimes you're a little bit further behind on the timeline there of trying to get to the best thing, and you're working your way there. And sometimes it requires collaborators or new cards to get released, and then boom, all of a sudden your janky pile is maybe meta defining.
Yeah, I really like that, because when we're trying to basically explain what cEDH is, and especially to newer players, what the best decks are in terms of this conversation is not relevant in terms of like the intent of the game. You can take whatever deck you want in terms of just like, nobody would probably consider Prosh cEDH anymore, just because of Corvold's, in my opinion, a better commander, and that's not about this conversation. But you could still take a Prosh deck, build it to its most powerful like combos with food chain and whatever. You run all the rocks, the tutors, and everything. And if you sit down at a table, people would consider that cEDH. Whether it's a top deck or not is irrelevant. But the intent of the deck is to win the most effective and efficient as those cards and colors provide.
Yep, exactly. And so that kind of touches on like what you're bringing to the table. And so I think next it would be good to talk about what you can expect to see and sort of how you might want to navigate the plays that you make and how other players might do that as well. So what would you say are some of the like sort of the defining characteristics of how players might navigate a cEDH table versus maybe a more casual one?
So in regards to the deck choices, I think you're going to see a fair variety of turbo decks, mid-range decks, and stacks decks. And sometimes those decks also intersect over each other. I think it's fair to say you're going to sit down at a traditional cEDH table. You're probably going to see a lot of blue for obvious reasons, because blue is just a really great color. Magic kind of does almost everything in that format. So I think you're going to see like, we just spoke on Blue Farm. So Blue Farm is like a mid-range style deck that's got 4 colors. It draws lots of cards. It has different ways to press the advantage, to set back, and just to do exactly like what Jun really wants to do, but with blue kind of backing it up, like as Jun would do in like constructed formats. It's really a great mid-range list. And then you have your turbo list. I think a great easy way to just say turbo is going to not necessarily always, but is the hyper aggressive ad nauseum list that also can be backed by green, white, or blue, depending on what style of deck that is, where the deck is basically utilizing these hyper efficient rituals like Dark Ritual, Dockside Extortionist, trying to cast ad nauseum, Peer into the Abyss, and possibly wheel effects, and whatever how the deck's constructed. So you're going to see that quite a bit. And then there's Stacks list, where Stacks is going to be, because people have their pet Stacks deck, but I would say a great traditional Stacks list that also falls into some different categories, and I don't want to misquote the list, would be something like Winona or something like that. Like that deck is, you expect to kind of see that deck. It's also a pretty popular commander on top of that.
Yeah, there's definitely a wide variety of archetypes and decks that fall under them, and it's good to know what they are and know that you don't necessarily need to be able to. I wouldn't really think of them as like 3 baskets that are very separate things. There's a lot of, especially when you talk about a deck like Blue Farm or a lot of mid-range of your decks, they can really turn on the turbo. Yeah, they're really have the ability to like slow it down or speed it up. And so just knowing like sort of the broad archetypes, what to look for, and really just the sense of like, what do I need to be able to deal with, and not necessarily like I have to be able to identify whether this is the turbo deck. And that'll be something more you learn as you go on, as you start to see certain card choices that a player might use, then you'll kind of pick that up. But yeah, I think we can go on to the sort of play style that we might see at a cEDH table, which is a little different from a casual table. Really in cEDH, I think it could best be defined as like, it's sort of like if you started at like turn 4 in a casual game, I think, where the setup is kind of all turn 1, and you really need to be able to affect the game in some way or establish something as early as turn 1. You want to be able to interact on turn 1 or be able to set up something that's going to stop the faster decks who are looking to do all that on turn 1.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And based on what your deck does, the deck you bring, and then you sit down at the table, you look at your pod composition, that really matters on how you decide how you want to design your first turn play, and what types of hands you want to keep. Seed order 2, there's all these other kind of factors that go into it. So if I'm looking at a table and it's a lot of creature decks, I'd probably not going to play my Mystic Remora turn 1. I'd probably rather play my Mana Dork, and that's not always the case, but that's just a simple example. And it's so it's never really as easy as that. But that's just a really kind of easy example to go with. But also too, I just think having a great conversation, just understanding when you're sitting down at the table, it's cEDH. So rule 0 conversation, I think I would just kind of go over it with them, but it's almost inherently spoke, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still have that conversation, because not everybody has that same terminology. There's a lot of times where I've played at a lot of local, and I've played like my Lord Windgrace, whatever the new Soul Windgrace deck, which is just this super synergy lands list that only runs Soul Ring. It doesn't run anything else. It doesn't have Mana Crypt. I don't have Vampiric Tutor in the list. I think I only have like Demonic Tutor, and then it's like Creature Green Tutors. But outside of that, and I'm still like able to like put together like a crazy turn 4, turn 5, because all the cards just synergize each other. There's like a lot less interaction. And, if someone has like a Wrath effect, you can just rebuild all Field of the Dead, and people would consider that cEDH because they just think I'm just like, because I'm winning. And that's not the case at all. So I always think it's really good to have those conversations, and that way, the feel bads or anything like that's kind of out of the way. And what cEDH is that it's purist. in terms of that power level. So you understand what you're getting into with the Thassa's Oracle combos and those type of things.
Yeah, for sure. And I I think it can be one of the freeing things, at least for me, about cEDH is there. I like you said, I wouldn't say there's a lack of a rule zero conversation, but it steers in a really different direction than your typical one at a casual table, where it's more about, anything goes for your decisions and your play and your deck, but you still want to have conversations about like, hey, you know, is it okay to do this? You want to be mindful of the other players. Everybody's still, you're not going to sit at a cEDH table and it's going to be really cutthroat and everyone's going to be rude to you. And there's none of that. It's still a social game. And I think especially as we go further on and we talk about sort of the deeper mastery of the game, that becomes even more apparent. But you definitely still keep in mind, like, hey, you want to be nice, you want to be the cool guy everybody wants to play with, and the conversations, even though they are, it is the vibe is generally more, hey, everything goes. You still will have people like, hey, do you mind if I play stacks, or do you mind if I play this? Because people are really looking for a good time still, and you won't get as many of the mid game like, oh, you run that card, because that's just that is how cEDH works, and it's really, to me at least, maybe controversial. It's kind of playing Commander the way the rules would have you, and by extension the right way. And so you don't really have to worry about any of that external game design, really, where you're trying to make the game work for you. It's already kind of playing to what it is, and it all sort of fits together and it works.
Yeah, so that's one of those things that I really love about cEDH as the format itself is, and aside from me coming from more of a competitive background, it's like when I go into a cEDH pod, I just know what to expect. Now, whatever type of decks that they're playing, that's not my concern. What's my concern is that I know they're trying to win the game in whatever fashion their deck is designed, whether that's grind out through value with the Krom and a Timna, whether that's to close it out fast with like a Eureka with a Thassa's Oracle combo that I already mentioned or something like that. Or if they're just trying to like playing something like a Kamal, Timna, win conless stacks, make you hate your life deck because they've got all the stacks pieces out and they always start with the Terminal Deafening Silence. But joking aside, I understand that. So I don't have the feels bads. But like you said, if it's my friends and I, we're playing, and we're trying to get as many games in as possible, I'm not going to bust out something that's going to inherently slow the game down to where we only get maybe one game in. And that doesn't mean necessarily we just got to all play hyper turbo decks, but I also want to respect the other players at the table and just to see what kind of game that they're wanting to play. And if they're like, oh, I'm cool, just play whatever you want, awesome, then that's a great conversation. And still having those conversations and asking if you don't know what a card does, all the social cues and questions and the camaraderie that you build in a game, those don't go out the window in cEDH. And I would argue the fact that cEDH is a more interactive form of Commander because there's more cards on the stack, and then there's cards in graveyards, and they're just like if you ever seen a chain with like something leading with like a Veil Summer into a counter spell, triggering the Rhystic Studies and all these different layers and stuff that go onto it, there has to be a lot of communication. Just watch any Sakashima game. There's a ton of communication, so that doesn't get thrown out the window. In fact, I would think it's more enhanced, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's cool because to me cEDH is, you get more action from the beginning. Like you really are playing. Like I feel like a lot of casual games, like I mentioned, they kind of start like turn 2 or 3 where you might get a turn 1 Soul Ring or like a turn 1 whatever, your random synergy 1-drop that you're running, and then turn 2 maybe you take off, and turn 3 you play a Cultivate, and then by turn 4 people are doing it, and you're all kind of just passing and not really even paying attention all that much. But in cEDH, because immediately you're engaged, because turn 1 you either need to be progressing your own game plan, thinking about how you're going to stop someone else's game plan, you're immediately focused on the action, and because 75% of that action is across the table, that's immediately encouraging you to be thinking about interaction. And even when you're like thinking, okay, I just need to counter the spell, a lot of times there's a lot of table talk involved in that, where you're thinking like, okay, especially as you're newer, you want to reach out to your table and be like, hey, do I need to interact here if I have something? And you end up with a game that's a lot of back and forth sort of fighting it out, but also a lot of back and forth teaming up, because you're all each other's opponents, and because of that you're all each other's allies until there's only, two of you left.
Yeah. And too, just by practicing these skills in a game, especially if you're newer at it, I think it's going to enhance your gameplay, because it's going to allow your gameplay and then your ability to have those conversations in a game. Even if they're not even political in that regard, just more so just understanding like how decks and stuff work. It's going to enhance you as a player as a whole. And like I'll give myself for example. When I first really got into cEDH, I was a 1v1 player. So while my my Magic skills and the understanding of the gameplay and everything was there, but necessarily I didn't know how to table talk the right way or understand certain things. So eventually just kind of opening myself up, just kind of going, I don't know anything. I just want to basically come in and learn. And I'm going to take the first X time to just kind of really embrace what this is. And I'll get my teeth kicked in for a little bit. And then once it's really amazing. It's like that, like you're in that story arc and you're going through the training and, you're starting to see the character develop and whatnot. And that's what happened. And then once I understood kind of the complexities of the game along with the simplicities of it, I was able to kind of merge the two and was able to start like picking up wins, and not just that, but helping other people win and engaging in the game in a different way and leveling myself up. I leveled my group up. My group was all pretty much casual players, and now we all play cEDH. We literally have two tiers we play. We play cEDH and we play precons. So I buy the precons when they come out, and I never add or change anything about them. We just play exactly the way they are because they're fun. So like the 40K precons, the Warhammer 40K precons, those are a blast. Those are very good. And that's what we do. That way we know exactly what we're playing. And sometimes I'll be a ham and try to jam a precon into a cEDH game. Joking aside, I really think having those conversations with people really allows you to get better at the game and understand the mechanics and just the human nature of it. And that's one thing that everybody's worried about, like turn order and all this other stuff and what to do with Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora and whatnot, and all these technical things. But I think just understanding there's a massive human element to it, and that it's really a kind of a big social experiment in that regard. And once you have that, you can kind of just be yourself, and also playing with people that you're comfortable with too. That's going to help you grow and learn. I think that's a pretty valuable asset. So if you can find yourself someone like that or a group like that, then that's awesome. Rock on.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the precons, because I've even heard people like Rebel and Ian, I think specifically, talk about how you can take a cEDH mentality into a precon game, and sort of like you can see how it's different there. Just like if you go into a game like already, like as you're starting out, right? Maybe even if you're proxying, it might take you a bit to get your stuff together and get a full pod. I think you can really take your play group and just say, hey guys, I want to play this game like it's a cEDH game. But we're not doing the spite plays. We're not doing the sort of deals you might typically make that are weird and maybe between like, I won't attack you this game if you leave me alone next game, like crazy stuff like that. And then just playing the game as it is, interacting where you think you should. And I think just trying that, not even getting a new deck, just play what you have, play it that way, you'll immediately see that it relieves sort of a lot of tension at the table while also getting everybody focused. And you can kind of see what cEDH has to offer even before going over to it. And then when you get there, it just gets intensified.
Oh, yeah, that's such a great example, too, because then that takes into account like mulliganing decisions, trying to actually look for like an optimal hand to play with versus like playing like all these vivid lands and like bounce lands and all these things for the first 3 turns, like you're actively, I'm looking for probably like a good 1-drop Soul Ring or Arcane Signet in regards to the precons, or I guess like now they have all like the talismans and Felwar Stone and whatnot. Or if you're on a greens deck, like I'm really trying to like look for like a turn 1 Dork into a turn 2 Cultivate, because at that point it's basically like a rock, because you're now going to get that advantage. So when you take that mentality, you really get to optimize your list without ever having to change a card in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you immediately sort of start to think about it, and I think it helps too because, and this is what episode 2 is going to be about. Learning the staples is a bit of a jump from casual Commander to most cEDH games. I think now there's a lot more interplay, and it's become a little bit blurrier. But especially some of the more niche staples and a lot of the interaction you see is going to be pretty different. And it can help you learn cEDH in an environment where you're comfortable because you already know these cards. They're what you're already playing with. But then you're thinking about them and you're evaluating them. And I think that's probably the biggest skill any cEDH player needs, is to be constantly sort of evaluating what they're doing and be like present and thinking, what do I need to do next? And I think sort of that energy, for at least for me, and I think a lot of other people, is what is unique to cEDH versus a casual game.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And just the mental bandwidth that you have to put into cEDH. I'll be honest. So I don't like doing like all those crazy deals of like, hey, if you don't attack me, I'll let you have my slice of pizza for the next game or whatever. Just and by no means don't stop doing that. That's not what we're saying. Those are for fun times with your friends or people you enjoy playing with. But we're just trying to help explain cEDH as a whole, and a lot of some of the. I feel like, and I don't think it's nearly as much anymore. You still get those comments of it's just a turn 1 format, and it's just not the case. Yes, games can end on turn 1, but that's not the overall crux of what the format is. The format is very much different than that. It's very hyper interactive. You essentially go into like this interesting agreement where people basically mulligan based on what their deck does and kind of the pod. And then you play like these multi subset of games within the game structure itself. And sometimes the person just has it on 1 or 2. And then if not, it can go to turn 4 or 5. And then in the later stages of the game too, based on the pod composition and everything. But that's the one thing about it that I find it very unique. And really, I think that's where like the 60 card players that are coming over to cEDH, they really kind of bring a different mentality to the game. Because I feel like there's a lot of like casual people in terms of like almost mid-level precon, that feel of like they play with cEDH cards, but that they're not still trying to optimize gameplay, and you've seen the comments before of, like in one of your videos where you were talking about the top 5 enchantments. Those were also the top 5 enchantments in your opinion, and also probably based on some statistics. And then people are like, well, that card's not a top enchantment, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, and cEDH it is, and it's pretty hard to argue that Restic Study, Mystic Lemora, those cards don't see a lot of play. But one thing I do love specifically about this conversation is to try to kind of break the ice of people who are in casual, that are in that arms race with their friends, that are kind of teetering on the balance of wanting to really kind of push it. They're on the database, they're looking at the deck list, they're trying to find what like little cool technology they can add, still keep their casual stuff in, but maybe make their combos more efficiently. I've seen Thassa's Oracle starting to really move its way into casual games now. Now, the way you get to Thassa's Oracle is different. They're not just trying to gem Demonic Consultation or a Tainted Pact. They might like I've seen a lot of Kennen style decks or Thrasios list, mostly Kennen, because people love them some Kennen and casual. But like it's that kind of thing where they do like all these big crazy things, generate infinite mana, and then draw their deck out somehow, put a Thassa's Oracle into play. So they're starting to take that technology and kind of move it over, but still try to keep their deck in like this weird limbo that's like teetering on the edge. And, we're trying to tell these people like, what you might think of, it's just like this super hyper competitive, like spiky people that are rude and jerks. If you watch really any cEDH channel live or recorded, it's really just a lot of people having fun and just kind of goofing off and all that type of stuff. And they're just playing with good cards. So that's literally what it is. And to like kind of sum it up in a very, very primitive way of saying it.
Yeah, I've spoke about this with a lot of different people where a lot of Commander players are already way closer to cEDH than they think they are, where they're maybe like an interaction suite different, where they're accelerating still, they have the same win conditions, they're just not quite taking the last step. And I think, especially for people who are working their way up and not necessarily aware of cEDH and building their way down, there's a lot of sort of, they're maybe a little nervous about going into it because it's like, oh, it is such an intense format. It's so fast. It's so much stronger than what we're doing. When really it's just like, you're gonna be doing what you're doing, but already like a little bit faster, a little bit more, and a little bit more interactive. And you kind of get to do with, I'll say with one of the biggest things about cEDH, with it being faster, it is roughly a turn 4 to 5 format. Typically, that's when it averages. You kind of want to be able to win around turn 2 or 3. But I found that fixating on the count in the number of turns is really just misleading. Because like we mentioned earlier, when you're playing on turn 1, the games really starts out the gate with a lot of cEDH games where you might see someone turn 0, put in a land into play. They have mana up. They can do something before any other player even gets to take their turn. Or you'll have turn 1 plays where someone casts their Soul Ring. It gets countered. Mental misstep. Because you're playing so much more, because you're starting earlier and you're going faster, and because the density of cheap spells and interaction is so high, you really get a lot of game in a very short amount of turns. Because cEDH games are typically not that short. They're usually like an hour to 2 hours still. They're about the same as a regular Commander game. But there's just a shorter number of turns, a shorter number of untaps, and you're not making as many land drops.
Yeah, but with just, a higher interaction suite, cards that do a lot more things, like in like a casual game, like your Dockside Extortionist might come into play and put in like big like god that like the green-red god that like pumps stuff up. Xenoghost, there you go. Yeah, I used to play that card in Standard, the 4-drop Planeswalker, but not the god version. But anyway, so that's like something Dockside might do. Dockside in our format and the format that we're discussing here, it's got the ability to just allow these more hyper efficient cards to just take full advantage of it. It allows you to really accelerate, and then obviously, certain decks can loop Dockside Extortionist, and not even necessarily like loop it infinite times. Like, casting Dockside, bouncing it back with a card like a Chain of Vapor, and then replaying Dockside. That's going to give you such a massive advantage. If all that resolves. So that's really what that format is about efficiency and being able to play with the cards and the most. Trimming the fat per se on a lot of that. And, there's not like a lot of fluff in their decks. So it's a little bit different philosophy in terms of just the speed of the format, like you said. But we're just really just trying to kind of impress upon people, like, you can really have a lot of fun with this format and get a lot of games in. So that's really what we're trying to just basically broaden the scope and allowing our listeners and viewers to kind of come in and go, this isn't a very, we're not up here preaching holier than thou in terms of cEDH. We're just like, hey, you should come try the format out. It's really fun. And these are going to be some of the cool ways to learn about it and then how to hop into it.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely just want to, that's what we do, all of us. Like if we were in it for the money, we would have picked a different game. We're just here to get.
Yeah, I'd be playing Yu-Gi-Oh. No, I'm joking. Still, Pokemon.
But it's just the most fun to me. I don't know if I would say when I started playing Magic, it was sort of like what I thought a game could be sort of changed a bit. And I think the only other time that really happened was when I started playing cEDH again. It was almost like getting Magic again, because it's so different and it's so much. You just get to, it sort of is like the big crazy turns that you get to take, like in Commander, like where the fun is happening. You sort of just get to do that right from the beginning. You get to just be like, you get to say no. Like if you're like if you love counter spells, you could not ask for a better format.
You're a terrible person if you like blue. I'm sorry.
You get to just say no immediately before you even make your land drop. You just say no. You're not playing Soul Ring this game. It's not happening. And you get to get into it so fast, and you get to do so much of it. And I think maybe a little off topic, what's really interesting to me is that even in a format like an Eternal format where it's just all the most broken stuff, color identity is still like, I would say, stronger in cEDH almost than casual Commander. Like if you're a red deck, you do red stuff. You are going fast. You are turboing out. You're just, don't even worry about next turn. You're trying to do it now. And it's like the same for every color. This is, if you play black, this is ad nauseum is the most black card you could ever do. You are life is a resource is the name of the game. If you play white, you are really trying to keep everything fair and even, mostly, but it's a little bit favoring you. You know, if you play green, you're probably losing, but you get to play. You get to do it with a lot of creatures, and really powerful ones. Like, especially with green, I think can be surprising because you do get to play a lot of the big stompy things, especially the lower color green decks. You get to do the green thing because beating face, while this is a combo centric format, because life totals matter so much, because black is so powerful in this format, hitting someone in the face is really reliable strategy at affecting the game. You are meaningfully affecting the game state when you deal 5 damage to the ad nauseum player. And yeah, it's cEDH is the best. Hopefully we can show you. Hopefully we can show you why in future episodes and help you understand it better.
Yeah, stop playing standard, start playing cEDH. Right now.
If you were playing standard, for the few people who were.
Yeah, I think that was really well put, honestly. And this isn't supposed to be like some super hard digestible episode 1. It's supposed to be just kind of take off your shoes, kick back, really just kind of enjoy it, and just hear the introduction of, especially you like Lemora's cards has just done a tremendous amount for the community in the short amount of time it's really just kind of sunk its teeth into and hasn't really looked back. And so I'm sure you'll put some links and stuff, the best way to reach you. But if you really want to learn some cEDH, it's got some great content to support, our conversation today.
Yep, there's plenty already there. There's tons coming. Learn to Play will be returning. Maybe by the time this episode even comes up, the Learn to Play guide might be coming up. Took a short break from that, but if you want to learn a specific deck, if there's a better way you think to learn a specific cEDH deck on YouTube, please point it out to me so that I can make my videos like it. Because I try very hard to make my stuff as good as I can and make it as digestible as I can. And if there's a better way to do it, I will gladly link you to that instead. Or try to learn from it. But yeah, we're just here to try to make cEDH a little bit easier, make it better if we can, and just spread the good word. So yeah, this episode was a little bit looser and sort of more introductory. Next episode, we are going to be diving into some of the staples of the format, going over specifics about the cards you might see in the game, sort of what defines a lot of the archetypes that really run cEDH and sort of define it right now. And get into the specifics and hopefully make it a lot easier to digest that first wall of information that hits you once you get into a game and you're asking yourself, what does that card do?
Yeah, we're really excited. Thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to us. I know we just got started, but Matt's been a big part of the community over the last, year and a half, something like that. So, we're going to try to produce the best content we can in regards to our topics. And so hopefully you will enjoy that and give us some good feedback on how we can improve. And until then, take us away.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been Learning cEDH. Go play cEDH.